Hi and welcome back to my channel, The Copycat Quilter. I'm Ginger. I have a confession. I love to buy those pretty quilt panels. You know, the ones with the beautiful scenes or the cute little children's pictures on them. And I put them in my stash because I can't figure out what to do with them. So this summer I am kicking off PALOOZA, and I'm going to try to work through my stash of panels and give you ideas of how you can get those out of your stash too into sweet quilts. Now I have to admit, I kind of have this opinion of them that they're kind of cheating, you know, that the big part of the quilt is done for you, but I'm going to get over that idea. I love to do patchwork, I love to make blocks, but sometimes it's a lot to commit to an entire quilt top all full of pieced blocks. So this gives me a chance to play with some blocks and get to put together some patchwork, but to finish a quilt lickety-split. So I have something exciting coming up. I have a fellow YouTuber friend who also has a problem with panels, and we're going to get together in a collaboration. We're each going to pick our own panel, we're going to design it on our own, and then come back and show them off together and just see the variety of different ways you can use some of these panels. And it's not a voting, it's not a competition, there will be no winners or prizes, but we will have prizes for our viewers. So stay tuned for that series and pull some of your panels out of the closet and kind of sew along with us and see if you can get some ideas of how to use those panels out of your stash. So thanks for watching. Let's get started. I need to square my panel up, and I decided I want to have increments of 4 inches. So I'm going to cut it to 16 inches square. I've cut these two sides, but I wanted to point out I had to very carefully just trim the slightest amount over here because I'm already getting close to that letter with the 1/4 inch seam allowance. And also, in order to make sure the panel was straight, I used my ruler to get right under those words to make sure the words were lined up, because especially with it being a circle, I didn't really have another way to make it squared up. I'm going to add a border on this probably. I haven't decided for sure. But I did want to show you how I chose the colors for this. Let me cut the other panel. My neighbor's actually having twins. And if you've seen me film the window behind my sewing machine, she's across the parking lot from me. She's having twin girls, and they're doing a Peter Pan theme for the nursery. So I have this panel and this one. They came together as a set, and I've starched it so that stuff is going to come off once it's washed. But these were really kind of unusual colors, and they were kind of difficult to find something that would go with both, because I want to make scattered patchwork for both of them, and I want them to, you know, coordinate the same. They're not going to be exactly the same, obviously, but this was such a dark color and this one was such a, you know, softer palette. But I like they both had this orange kind of bright color in them, and they both have the limey green. So let me show you the fabrics I found. So here's some of the fabrics that I found. I actually took my Kona card, the color swatch card, and found, which I thought was a pretty close match to that one. It's a little darker, but you know, I'm not gonna lay that one right beside there so it won't show up so much. And this was kind of the closest I could get to this, which again isn't a perfect match, but it's really, really close. So I have my dark and my light, and I want to use the same colors on both so that they really coordinate. I had to be careful not to use too much of the dark here because it could kind of overwhelm it, but it does have those dark leaves and the words are dark. So I found this wild paisley marbled looking fabric, and it's kind of strange, but it actually picks up like that. It's the only one I got that has that kind of red color in it, and I like the way it just kind of went with those. I'm not sure if I'll put that up against the panel or not, but I really thought that was kind of a weird, funky, but it works kind of color. Then I had a couple that were just blender fabrics. I found these, and they had some of the blues and some of the mint green colors in them. And I actually found 2 florals. So I was walking around Joann Fabric with these laying on my cart and just laying them on top of bolts as I found them to try to find colors that would coordinate. So I found this, which I thought went nicely with that and has the green, but has a little bit of the darker stuff in it. And then I found this, which has, again, some of the greens and a little bit of the yellowy color. It's kind of a strange palette, but I was really surprised. And I did get this fabric to go on the backs for the backing fabric. So my plan is this. I am going to make a lot of 4-inch patchwork blocks. It's a nice little size. I can use my 8-inch Qube or my 4-inch Accuquilt Qube, but you don't have to have Accuquilt to do any of this. I took some of my favorite little blocks and just made them. And I tried to put this lighter color green with the darker floral, and then the darker color with the lighter floral. So I made some of these square within a square. They're set on point. And then I just made some simple rectangles. I made flying geese using kind of that blender fabric, and then also a set with the dark. I cut one of the blender fabrics into strips, and I cut 1.5 inch strips so they'll finish at 1. I was really trying to keep the scale of these things small so that the panel stood out, because these are not gigantic panels and it could get like really overwhelming fast, I think. I cut a lot of these into squares. I have more rectangles. More rectangles. More square into squares. I did some hourglass squares. I think that's kind of it for the variety. But like I said, at first, whenever I was looking at this, I thought the palette looked really weird. But then you can see, like, whenever I'm putting them around, each different fabric's kind of picking up a little different piece. And I really like the way it looks. I was kind of surprised by myself. So I have a lot more of these squares to do. If you know me, you know I have not planned ahead. I have no idea how many of these things I need. So that's where I am right now. I'll go make some more squares, and I'll come back and show you how I kind of started playing around laying out and see what I can come up with. I ran into a little challenge here. I thought I could just lay the Tinkerbell block on top of Peter Pan and line up the circles so that, you know, I could use these edges to cut and not have to do the counting and everything. But I realized the Peter Pan one goes much closer to the edges on both sides. And if I cut it like this, I'm barely going to be over 1/4 inch. Or I'm only going to have maybe 1/4 inch show. So I'm actually going to cut this one just about 1/4 inch bigger all the way around. And I will compensate with that somehow with the strips I put around the edges, so that I'll make sure I end up where I can use multiples of 4-inch blocks. Here's my Tinkerbell panel. I added those strips around the edges to get it up to a multiple of 4. So after I added the 1.5 inch strips that finished to 1, I ended up with a 20.5 measurement. So that half is for the 1/4 inch seam allowance. So now I can put 4-inch blocks around it. I showed you the blocks that I created just at random using the different colors, and that was actually a lot of fun. Just cut a lot of shapes. I used my Accuquilt cubes. I ended up making way more than I needed, so I have a lot left over that I'll probably put into some patchwork on the back and make kind of a pieced back. Or I may even have enough that I might make another little quilt for the bassinets at the hospital. That's one of the charities that we donate to at my guild. So let me show you what I did to decide where my blocks go. First, I started on both of the sides, and I just started placing blocks. I did try to balance out the darks and lights between the two sides, and I also wanted to not put two of the same color side by side. So I wouldn't have put this dark here, because then that block kind of bends into the other one. It kind of blends, and I wanted the blocks to look distinct. So using those things, using those kind of general ideas, I just started putting my blocks around. I did put the flying geese into sections of 4 because they just kind of look like flying geese that way. I could have left them in sections of 2, but I needed 2 geese to end up with a 4-inch square. So now that I have them laid out, I can see, to me, this one looks a little dark heavy compared to that one. So I'm going to swap out these two. And I like that better. I would go ahead and sew these 2 sides and sew them onto the panel before I start the top and bottom. These took 5 4-inch squares down because it's a 20-inch block. So this one's going to take that 5 plus 2 more. So I'll have 7 squares on the top and the bottom blocks. So I like this balance. A couple of things I could have done differently. I could make all the flying geese one color and then have the other color somewhere else. I kind of like the balance of this. This is a little dark. So I think I'll swap this out. But then that makes my blue flying geese, so I'll just shuffle those. Then I don't like those 2 together. So I think I like that. I think that looks pretty balanced on the lights and darks. I did make a few additional blocks that were just a 4-patch that I've added in here. I made a light one with green florals, and I guess I made a dark one with the green florals too. So in order to keep these straight when I go to the sewing machine, I'm going to pick up the sides first, and I pick up by the left corner and start top to bottom. And I'll put a pin in this corner. That way I know when I go to sew this at the sewing machine, this is the top left. I'll take this and sew it to the top of the next square and over again. And I'll do that entire row. Then I'll do that one, and I'll pick up these from left to right and keep the pin in the top left corner. That usually helps me from getting too mixed up. So I'll take these down, take them to the sewing machine, and put them together. So this is my second panel, the Peter Pan panel, and I really think this one is very cute. Of course, the Tinkerbell one's cute too. This one actually has a little tink on it. And I was originally going to put more blocks around the edges to make a second round of patchwork blocks. And when I started laying that out, I just thought it looked really, really busy and kind of took away from the panel. I mean, obviously, if you've got a panel, you want it to be the star. So I decided instead I would make maybe a couple of rows of borders. I tried this, and I felt like it kind of blends into some of the blocks if it has that dark green or dark blue on the edge. And I don't like when that happens because it kind of makes your block look misshapen. Like here, this rectangle is going to run out into that, and once it's quilted, that's just going to look like a rectangle instead of a separate block and border. So I think I'm going to go with this one. I've had it on the design wall for a few days. Still not my favorite, not the craziest about it. I don't want to introduce another color, even though I probably could put a little white strip there, but I really don't want to do that since I didn't do that in any of my blocks. So instead, I'm going to use this marble print and make a strip set for my borders. So these are each cut at 1.5, which will make it finish to a 1-inch, and then this was a 2.5-inch strip, and it finishes at 2 inches. So that adds 4 inches on each side and on the top and bottom. So it increases the size by 8 inches, and I think it'll end up close to 40 by 40, which is a nice size, you know, little baby quilt, kind of a decorative, not exactly meant to fit the whole crib, but just a pretty little quilt to display and use in the nursery. So I'm going to sew these strips around and come back and figure out what I'll do for the binding. I think kind of leaning towards just using this marble print again so that I don't introduce something else out on the edge. I really like this dark green teal kind of color, but I just don't know. I'll get it on the board, I'll get the backing put on, and then I'll probably lay some strips to see what binding that I like. So how do you think they turned out? I love them. I think they're really sweet together. They'll be perfect for twins. They're not exactly the same, but they coordinate really nicely together, and I hope they get a lot of use out of them. It was fun to just get to make a bunch of blocks that I enjoyed making and to put them around a panel and have a quilt finished pretty quickly. So I hope you stick around. Let me know in the comments below if you have panels, if you have a stash of them, or if you've never even bought them because you're kind of nervous or couldn't figure out what you would do with them, or maybe you have that idea that it's cheating. So stay tuned for more episodes and some new ideas of ways to use your panel during the big PALOOZA month. I hope you enjoy your quilting, and I'll see you next time.